We began last week looking at the miracles of Jesus that the Gospels offer us, and we're going to be doing so for some time this fall. And we suggested last week that all of the miracles are with purpose and intent beyond the wow factor, as we called it. And certainly that is no place truer than the scripture we would look at today. It has an unusually large wow factor. So look with me at one of the very interesting accounts of a miracle of Jesus nonetheless. It's in Mark's Gospel at the very beginning, the first chapter, verses 21 through 28. Jesus and his disciples, whom he has just called to follow, Mark tells us, are on the move. And he picks up in verse 21 telling us this. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this?" "A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Now, when we think about Jesus' miracles, perhaps there is none greater that have that wow factor than Jesus casting out demons. It evokes all sorts of images for us, no doubt with the help of Hollywood, all sorts of ideas, a curiosity. What is this and what could it be? And so it might be helpful for us to think about that for a moment, not only in relation to this miracle and Jesus dealing with an unclean spirit or demonic power, but about all of Jesus' miracles. For you see, one of the things that, whether we realize it or not, comes to the surface rather quickly is our whole worldview when we look at Jesus and his miracles. They all, to differing degrees, incite our curiosity and invite all sorts of questions about how these things might have transpired. And before we even get to the question of what they mean, which is the greater question in the gospel, we can't help but thinking about how could this be and how did it work? And so when we come to a passage like this, we all begin to ask questions. Is this someone who was suffering with some type of mental illness in Jesus' day? And Jesus and the author of the Gospels and maybe many others just simply dealt with it in a way that we understand differently now, but that was their limited understanding. Is this just Mark giving us dramatic storytelling about someone being healed from something unknown? Is this just bizarre human behavior, for we know that that happened then and still happens now? Are there some things that we just don't quite understand about all of this? For there are many things that we know Jesus did and said that are beyond our understanding and touch on things that are far beyond and above us. Now, if we completely disallow that there is a supernatural element to any of Jesus' works, to any of his miracles, then we are left with a rather small arena in which to operate. And we have backed ourselves into a place in which we have little choice but to understand it in those sorts of ways. This is dramatic storytelling. This is a person who is mentally ill in a way that we might understand more fully now, but the disciples and Mark and maybe even Jesus didn't understand. But if we don't back ourselves into that corner, if we will allow that the God whom we worship and serve can and does intervene in our natural order of things, then we have left ourselves open to what seems like a rather straightforward account from Mark. It doesn't mean, if we allow for miracles, that everything that happens around us is necessarily a miracle. And so if we will allow that God can do the miraculous, that God worked through Jesus and did those things that are beyond our understanding, but we would say are miraculous, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything we read in the Gospels doesn't maybe have some different type of understanding. There were those who came to Jesus with an illness that we know differently about now than then. It doesn't mean that we go out into life and see necessarily everything, in this instance, as being animated by demons and evil spirits and unclean spirits. But it does put us in a place very humbly to understand that God cannot be limited. That Jesus, in fact, did amazing and miraculous things by God's power. It does put us in a place to receive from the gospel what seems like a very straightforward indication, one in which Jesus believed he was confronting very real evil forces that somehow exist in our world. So just because we believe that this story is a straightforward story that tells us demonic activity is real and could occur on our human plane doesn't force us to see behind every event some demonic activity. It doesn't force us to go wild with this story, if you will. So I want to invite you to take Mark's story at face value. And then I want to invite you to go a little bit deeper behind what is surely very dramatic, very strange, very curious. You see, Mark's story has such a wow factor that you and I may be tempted to get hung up on all of our questions about demons, spirit possession, about what Jesus is actually doing, and is there some implication for you and I as to how we see the world and how we live out our Christian faith. But I want to invite you to something deeper that Mark is after. It's a little bit more challenging. For you see, sometimes the curious we can hold at arm's length and talk about and think about, and we sidestep some of the deeper, more personal messages that God would challenge us with. And I think that's the case here with this miracle.